Committee will come to order. Welcome to today's Commerce, Justice, and Science Subcommittee hearing examining the Department of Justice's fiscal year 2016 budget request. First, let me welcome Attorney General Loretta Lynch to her first hearing before this subcommittee as she assumes the important responsibility of serving as our nation's chief law enforcement officer. Welcome. As you begin your two-year term as Attorney General, I believe that it's critical for you to return the office of Attorney General to its constitutional purpose, which is to enforce the laws of the land, not the decrees and whims of the President. The President has a White House counsel and plenty of attorneys arguing for his points of view on immigration, privacy, environmental regulations, and more. The Attorney General, I believe, is the servant of the laws and citizens of the United States, not the President. I want to encourage you, Madam Attorney General, to consider this perspective carefully as you begin your service in a job that's critical to our democracy and to the rule of law. I'm deeply troubled by your support of the President's unilateral executive actions, which provide amnesty to millions of illegal immigrants. Fortunately, this sweeping policy change, undertaken without input from Congress, has been stayed by the courts, while a detailed review is conducted through the lens of the law and the Constitution. I hope that while this litigation is pending, progress will be made on key responsibilities that are within the Department's jurisdiction, such as the Executive Office for Immigration Review. The President's 2016 budget seeks a funding level of $482 million for this office, which is $135 million above the current 2015 funding level. That's a big increase. Significant improvements and reforms, I believe, are needed in our immigration court system in order to address the approximately 440,000 pending cases, some of which involve unaccompanied children. This backlog equates to a waiting period of several years before a case is heard. I believe, and I would hope you would agree, that this is unacceptable. While the needs are great for our immigration courts, I have serious reservations about such a large funding increase when inefficiencies and management concerns have yet to be addressed within your office. In your new role as the Attorney General of the United States, I'm interested in hearing your suggestions and recommendations for prioritizing spending for the Department's most important and pressing missions involving national security, law enforcement, and criminal justice. The President's 2016 budget request for the Department of Justice totals $29 billion, which is $2 billion above the 2015 enacted level. And while funding for the Department of Justice is one of the federal government's highest priorities, we simply cannot afford such an increase in spending while operating under our current budget constraints, which put a lid on all of us. I'm concerned that even in the midst of the current fiscal climate, the President has proposed new grant programs and initiatives that would further stretch the Department's spending. When it comes to law enforcement, your arrival at the Department at a critical time of needed leadership is welcome. Since our hearing early this spring with the Department's law enforcement chiefs, we've seen the departures of the ATF director and the DEA administrator. I hope that you will pay particular attention, Madam Attorney General, to these law enforcement agencies to ensure that they faithfully execute their duties during this time of change. As an example, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives has a rule pending that would impose burdensome, and most people believe unnecessary regulations regarding firearms that are lost or stolen in transit. However, the ATF's own statistics indicate that this number is insignificant and should not be a cause for concern. It certainly does not warrant, I believe, such encumbering regulations. Oversight and accountability remain a top priority for this committee. I've consistently expressed my displeasure to your predecessor regarding the department's resistance to cooperating with the Department of Justice as Inspector General. I continue to hear from the Inspector General that this office is his office. His office is having difficulties in obtaining the documents needed to do their job. I urge you to work with the Inspector General to make sure that he and his staff can successfully complete their reviews and audits of the Department of Justice. I've outlined the department that the department faces many challenges that will require fiscal support. The path for making meaningful progress runs through this subcommittee. I know that. As you begin your tenure, Madam Attorney General, I want to express the subcommittee's hope that we will have a productive and constructive working relationship. Thank you, Madam. Senator Mikulski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to welcome the Attorney General. We're so glad that you were finally confirmed, and we could get beyond the petty politics that were the obstruction to that confirmation. Before I go into my statement, though, I want to remind the committee that yesterday was Senator Shelby's birthday. So could we join in a round of applause and wish him good health and blessings?
Thank you.
Let's hope that's not the high point of the hearing. Madam Attorney General, you've had an eventful first 2 weeks in office. I know this is your very first congressional hearing since you've been confirmed, and we're looking forward to your testimony in terms of the Justice Department's needs for its 2016 budget. We are eager to hear from you about the many ongoing efforts at the many Justice Department agencies. We want to, first of all, thank you, Madam Attorney General, for your work in coming to Baltimore and your team to coming into Baltimore. It was tremendously helpful to the mayor, to our police department, and most of all, to the citizens to have the presence of the Justice Department. I personally want to thank you on behalf of the entire Maryland delegation for the professionalism of your team and, of course, yourself. I want to particularly acknowledge the right of the Deputy Attorney General, Ms. Gupta, Mr. Ron Davis, the Director of the COPS Program, Mr. Grant Lum, your outstanding community relations team that came in and provided very crucial technical assistance during very troubling times. We were in Baltimore on Tuesday together as you listened to faith-based community officials, faith-based community leaders. You met with local officials and even reached out to the Freddie Gray family. I will not be asking you any questions about the Freddie Gray investigation because we know it's an ongoing investigation. You have gotten a request from the mayor about asking the Department of Justice to open a pattern and practice investigation into our police department. Later on this afternoon, you will be getting a letter from the Maryland delegation supporting that request. That will go forward. But I want to say this, in many cities throughout the country, and including my own town of Baltimore, and in communities primarily that have significant populations of color, there has been now a tattered, worn, and even broken trust between the community and the police department. We've got to restore that trust. We need the police department. We want to express our condolences to the people in the police department of Queens about the death of Officer Brian Moore, who was gunned down so brutally. But we also do need criminal justice reform, and we need it with an urgency of now. I intend to ask questions about what you need in the way of resources to do the job that needs to be done, and also what reforms that are needed, that are specific and are targeted. We're also joined today by an outstanding appropriator, but also the the ranking member of the authorizing committee on the Judiciary Committee, a long history in this. We're here to show that the American people have a government on their side and to have a constitutional focus to what we do. We have put money in the federal checkbook, $2.3 billion for grant programs, target the resources for police, local government, and communities. They range from more cops on the beat to dealing with the rape kit backlog to child abuse. Mayors have told us they need help getting more cops on the beat. We had $180 million in doing that. We also wanted to help them be able to have the equipment that they needed and had $376 million in grant programs. Now we have to look at what does that mean. Some are crying out for body cameras. Is this just yet one more gimmick, or is it a crucial tool? Communities and nonprofits want to help our young people, and this is why we'll look for your thoughts either today or in the ongoing discussion on our juvenile justice programs of prevention, of intervention, who are helping with everything from delinquency prevention to the ongoing mentoring that we needed. As you know, many of our civil rights groups and community leaders have called out for criminal justice reform. We'll look forward to your advice to that, and we know the Judiciary Committee will also be doing it. But I'm going to have questions related to money and also training. That, in other words, if you get the money, should you get training? I look forward to asking questions on whether if you get COPS money, burn grant money, and others, should there be required training on how to deal with racial and ethnic bias? What about the use of force? Should there be national standards that every department meets? What about body cameras? There's privacy concerns, there's storage concerns, many concerns. What should we do about it? And last but not at all least, I do hope again for both this conversation and ongoing, the examination of the so-called broken window policy. When the broken window policy was initiated by, or talked about by an eminent sociologist, John Q. Wilson, I supported that policy. And I supported it as somebody who started her career as a social worker, that if you fix the broken window, that you intervene with youth when they were doing minor offenses, could we intervene in a way that prevented them growing up doing major offenses? But while we were looking at the broken window, at the so-called minor criminals, we were going to fix the broken windows. We were going to deal with vacant houses. We were going to deal with the truancy problem. We were going to do this, but now what seems to happen is the policy has deteriorated where we've stopped fixing the broken window and we've escalated the frisking. No more fixing, but lots of frisking, and that's what our folks feel. Last year, 120,000 police stops occurred in Baltimore. We're a population of 610,000. That's a lot. I don't know what the appropriateness of that, but I think we need to look at it. So today I sit here as the ranking member of the committee that will fund your department, and I assume my national responsibility. But I'm also here for the 85,000 kids, all of whom that day of the disturbance went home peacefully. What can we do to help them? The 610,000 law-abiding people in Baltimore who obeyed the law and helped to do that. So we look forward to working with you on what are the tools to restore confidence between our police and our community, but also put our arms around our young people and see what we can do to help them. And maybe when we fix a broken window, we have to fix the broken political process we have to get the job done. Thank you, and I look forward to your testimony.
Madam Attorney General, welcome to the committee. Your written testimony will be made part of the record in its entirety. You proceed as you wish.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And remind me to come around your birthday another time. It's quite a celebration. Well, good morning, Chairman Shelby, Vice Chairman Mikulski, and the other distinguished members of this subcommittee. It's indeed an honor to appear in front of you for the first time as the Attorney General. I look forward to working collaboratively with all of you today and in the days ahead as we seek to protect and to serve the American people together. But I want to take a moment to extend a special thank you to Senator Mikulski for your leadership in the United States Senate over the last 3 decades, for your support of the Department of Justice and its employees, and for the extraordinary example of public service you have provided to all Americans and especially to women. and I'm honored to have the opportunity to work with you during your final 2 years in office. Senators, as we approach National Police Week, which begins next week, it is fitting that we take a moment to consider the contributions and the needs of law enforcement. Thank you, sir. Actually, sir, it seems to be fixed, so let me move it up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senators, as I noted, National Police Week will begin next week. And at this particular time in history, it's important that we take a moment to consider the contributions and the needs of our law enforcement officers across the country. Law enforcement is a difficult profession, but a noble one. Now, over the course of my career as a federal prosecutor and as U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York, I have been privileged to work closely with truly outstanding public safety officials, and I've seen up close the dangers that they face every day. As mentioned by Senator Mikulski, earlier this week, Officer Brian Moore, a 25-year-old New York City police officer, died after being shot while trying to question a man in Queens. And just 2 days ago, Sergeant Greg Moore of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, was tragically gunned down, also while interacting with a suspicious individual. The tragic loss of these brave individuals serves as a devastating reminder that our nation's public safety officials put their lives on the line every day to protect people they have often never met. Their exemplary work is the foundation of the trust that must exist between law enforcement officers and the communities that we all serve. And that is why, when there are allegations of wrongdoing made against individual officers and police departments, the Department of Justice has a responsibility to examine the evidence and, if necessary, to help them implement change. While I was in Baltimore on Tuesday, I met with the mayor, law enforcement officials, and community, faith, and youth leaders. I spoke with an officer who had been injured amidst the violence, and I heard a number of ideas regarding ways in which the Justice Department can continue assisting Baltimore as they work to recover from recent unrest. Although the city has made significant strides in their collaborative reform efforts with the Community-Oriented Policing Services Office, I have not ruled out the possibility that more may need to be done. And I assure you, Senators, that I am listening to all voices. We're currently in the process of considering the request from city officials and community and police leaders for an investigation into whether the Baltimore City Police Department engaged in a pattern or practice of civil rights violations, and I intend to have a decision in the coming days. Now, the situation in Baltimore involves a core responsibility of the Department of Justice, not only to combat illegal conduct when it occurs, but to help prevent the circumstances that give rise to it in the first place. Going forward, your support of the department and of our funding in the President's fiscal year 2016 budget request will enable us to build on our successes and make further progress in the mission with which we are entrusted. And I am pleased to say that this budget request is in line with my highest priorities as Attorney General: safeguarding our national security, defending the most vulnerable among us, and strengthening relationships of trust and collaboration between law enforcement officers and the communities that we serve. Now, of course, our most important objective must continue to be protecting the American people from terrorism and other threats to our national security. As you know, under my predecessor, Attorney General Eric Holder, the Department of Justice engaged in essential efforts to counter violent extremism and domestic radicalization, to strengthen counterterrorism measures, to promote information sharing and collaboration with the intelligence community, and to provide training and technical assistance to our foreign partners. We must advance this progress on all fronts. We must prepare to meet new and emerging threats and vigorously defend American citizens at home and abroad. The President's budget request will strengthen our national security efforts by investing a total of $4.6 billion in the department's cutting-edge counterterrorism and national security programs. This total includes $775 million, an increase of $27 million, for addressing cybercrimes and enhancing the security of information networks. In an age in which criminals have the ability to threaten our national security and our economic well-being from far beyond our borders, it is critical that we expand our focus and strengthen our defenses to protect all Americans from exploitation and abuse. I firmly believe that cybersecurity must be among the top priorities for the Department of Justice. This important funding will allow us to build on the outstanding work of the Department in identifying new threats, thwarting attempted intrusions, and bringing the perpetrators of wrongdoing, wherever they may hide, to justice. As the Department works to safeguard American security, we are equally committed to upholding American values, including the protection of our most vulnerable populations. The fiscal year 2016 budget would provide $103 million in new civil rights investments to address hate crimes, sexual violence, and human trafficking, an area that warrants our renewed focus and redoubled effort. It would allocate $124 million to improve the efficiency of our immigration court system by supporting additional immigration judge teams and Board of Immigration Appeals attorneys, by expanding the successful legal orientation program, and by allowing for additional legal representation for unaccompanied children. And it would deliver $247 million in program increases for the Smart on Crime initiative, which was designed to address America's over-reliance on incarceration while reducing recidivism and deploying law enforcement resources more effectively. By all available evidence, this program has been a major success, as well as an area of bipartisan cooperation and agreement. The requested funds in this year's budget will allow us to extend this critical work and to amplify our shared commitment to a fair, efficient, and effective criminal justice system. The Department has made clear, and I firmly support, that this innovative approach does not in any way lessen our resolve to combat violent crime, drug trafficking, and other violations of federal law. We remain determined to vigorously investigate and prosecute criminal activity. The President's budget supports our goals in that regard by appropriating an additional $43 million for us to investigate and hold accountable those who break federal laws and harm innocent citizens, from illegal firearm and drug traffickers to perpetrators of healthcare scams and financial fraud. In all our efforts, we intend to work closely not only with this distinguished body, but also with our law enforcement partners on the front lines across the country. And that's why the President's request allocates an additional $154 million to support our state, local, and tribal partners in their own efforts to counter violent extremism, to hire and retain officers, to serve the victims of crime, to research best practices, improve indigent defense, and expand reentry programs. This appropriation includes nearly $95.5 million for the Community-Oriented Policing Services Hiring Program, $35 million for tribal law enforcement, and $20 million for the Collaborative Reform Initiative, a recently developed program that facilitates collaborations between the COPS Office and law enforcement agencies seeking assistance on a wide variety of criminal justice issues, from use of force practices and the deployment of crisis intervention teams to building trust with the members of their communities. As we have seen even in recent days, programs that establish trust and improve collaboration are essential to carrying out our law enforcement duties effectively and to the overall safety of the American people. In the days ahead, I hope and I fully intend to bolster our efforts in that area. I'm eager to work with this subcommittee and with Congress to build on the many achievements of the Department of Justice and to secure the timely passage of the President's budget request, which provides a total of $28.7 billion in discretionary resources for the Department, including $26.3 billion for vital federal programs and $2.4 billion for state, local, and tribal assistance programs. As a former United States attorney who saw firsthand, who lived through the unsustainability of sequester, I can tell you that this level of support is necessary to ensure that we can continue to protect the American people and effectively serve the priorities of the United States of America. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, the Subcommittee, I thank you once again for the opportunity to meet with you here today and to discuss the work of the Department, and I'm happy to answer questions that you may have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Madam Attorney General. In November of 2014, the President expanded immigration amnesty through executive order. In furtherance of his 2012 executive order to people over the age of 30 and to new arrivals. It also allows about 4 million additional illegal immigrants who have been in the country for 5 years and who are parents of U.S. citizens and legal residents to apply every 3 years for deportation deferrals. In January of this year, you testified during your confirmation hearing that you believe that the President's executive actions are legal and constitutional, even though the President stated on record many times that he did not believe he had the constitutional power to grant amnesty without authority from the Congress. My questions: why do you believe the President's executive actions granting amnesty to millions of illegal immigrants are legal and constitutional?
Mr. Chairman, you certainly have focused on one of the most challenging issues facing our country today, how to deal with the immigration issue. As I indicated during my January testimony, as a career prosecutor and former U.S. attorney, I particularly focused on the prioritization of the removal of the most dangerous of illegal immigrants from our country. With respect to that issue, I found that to be an eminently reasonable exercise of administrative and prosecutorial discretion. With respect to the actions involving the issuance of deferral to new members who would apply for that, I believe that matter is a subject that is under consideration by the courts. As you have noted, those actions have been enjoined, and as I stated also during those proceedings, I am committed to abiding by the injunction and certainly working with the Department of Homeland Security to ensure that the injunction is supported while it is pending.
As you assume, and you have the position of Attorney General, how will you, Madam Attorney General, enforce current immigration laws given your belief that the recent executive actions trump existing laws? In other words, do all executive actions, a presumption there, trump the laws of Congress? How do you rationalize that?
Senator, I believe that our existing laws are a vital resource in dealing with the problem of both illegal immigration as well as criminal activity that results from illegal immigration. And in particular, the Department's own Executive Office of Immigration Reform, as you have noted, is charged with adjudicating various types of immigration violations. That department, as you have noted, has suffered from a backlog of cases and inefficiency that have delayed actions separate and apart from the President's new policies that has delayed actions for far too long. Within the new budget request, the department would seek to hire additional immigration judges, 55 in total, to reduce this backlog. But also, Senator, recognizing that we simply cannot wait for additional money, we are taking steps already to try and make the Executive Office of Immigration Reform more efficient. Previous to my testimony, the judges have already worked to triage, so to speak, the types of cases that need to be adjudicated quickly. Judges have been reassigned and redeployed to handle the backlog of cases because we recognize that that is unsustainable. Separate and apart, of course, from the Executive Office of Immigration Reform, as I'm sure the committee is aware, I believe almost approximately 30% of federal criminal cases that are brought by our U.S. attorneys across the country relate to immigration offenses. So, Senator, separate and apart from the legal result or the court result of the November policies, the Department of Justice is moving forward both to prosecute criminal activity resulting from illegal immigration and to support the work of its Executive Office of Immigration Reform, which we believe is vital.
I want to shift into another area of financial fraud. One of your previous jobs, you were directly involved in several high-profile financial fraud settlements during your tenure as the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York. However, it's my understanding that not one of those settlements also involved a criminal prosecution. Why did you and the department, I know you weren't the Attorney General then, you were the U.S. Attorney, not pursue criminal charges? And how could you enter into $1 billion settlements sometimes with firms guilty of fraud and yet never see fit to prosecute not one person for mortgage or financial fraud? And will that change as now since you're the Attorney General? In other words, are people buying justice by a settlement?
Senator, with respect to the work with which I was proud to conduct as U.S. Attorney in regard to the Residential Mortgage-Backed Securities Initiative, my office was involved in 2 of the major settlements of that, as well as other outstanding U.S. attorneys' offices across the country. And throughout those investigations, the message at the time, both from the leadership at the time, from all the U.S. attorneys working on that, and from myself to my team, the direction was that no entity is above the law, no individual is above the law, no one is too big or too powerful to jail or to fail. But what the Department of Justice does in every case, Senator, is we follow the evidence.
Okay.
We ascertain the best way of achieving legal compliance when there have been violations and providing redress to victims. We look carefully in every case, not just the RMBS cases, but every case involving a financial institution where American citizens have lost hard-earned money to determine the best way to bring those wrongdoers to justice, and where the evidence leads us to find evidence that we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that there's been a criminal violation, we go in that direction. And I would point you to the number of criminal fraud prosecutions brought by my office on behalf of the victims of Ponzi schemes, mortgage fraud schemes, and real estate schemes over the years involving hardworking Americans who were defrauded of their life savings. Where we find evidence that points toward civil liability, we pursue that. But I can assure you, Senator, that both in my prior position and going forward, I take very seriously the obligation to protect the American citizens from fraud of all types, and it is one of my highest priorities as Attorney General.
Standard threshold for a civil case is not as high as the criminal case, and neither should it be. Is that correct?
That is correct. There is a different burden of proof on the government. And where we have evidence that meets the criminal burden of proof, we do proceed. And there are several people who are sitting in federal prison contemplating the results of their actions now who can provide proof of that.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Attorney General, there are many programs you have functioning at the local level, certainly in Baltimore. We have a top-notch U.S. Attorney's Office, an outstanding Baltimore FBI field office, joint task forces working with local government, going against everything, dealing with everything from human trafficking, such a vile and despicable thing, to Medicare fraud. Which we know, for example, in Florida, is already at $3 billion, defrauding our government of money that should be in the trust fund helping sick people. So we thank you for what you're doing. The issue, though, is also focusing on criminal justice reform. Because of our grant program, particularly in COPS, BURN, others, they go directly to local law enforcement. Do you think that there should be mandatory training in the areas of ethnic and racial bias, as well as also on the use of force, and that there should be a national standard? In other words, in order to get the money, you have to take the training that behavior will not tatter or wear out or even break the trust that the community must feel.
Senator, I think as we administer our grant programs to our local law enforcement partners, all of those issues are on the table and are under consideration. Currently, I will say that our view is that we feel that the grant program is a very important tool in bringing offices into compliance with not only federal standards, but community standards that they are aware of also. So we would not use that as a barrier to the grant program, but rather as an incentive to work with us and gain training on use of force policies. We have grants that are specifically targeted towards that through the COPS office, whether there's a collaborative reform effort or not, but through the COPS office, we provide specific training on best practices involving use of force. Not only do we provide the training, we also attempt to link local law enforcement with other local law enforcement offices that themselves have either received training from COPS.
But Madam Attorney
Right.
General, we'll get lost into collaborative reform and all this, and I don't mean lost. First of all, we do know that Baltimore City, through its both mayor and police commissioner and the concurrence of other elected officials, have initiated a collaborative reform effort in Baltimore. That is a voluntary effort where police departments reach out to you, meaning the Attorney General and his or her offices, to evaluate the department on how to better improve police community relations, law enforcement. That is underway, but that's voluntary.
Yes.
That's voluntary. Then, of course, there's the pattern and practice investigation. We know we've asked for that. You'll make your determination whether later on whether you'll initiate it. But what about where they haven't asked for collaborative reform, but they have asked for money?
Yeah.
There's a lot of let's get the money, and we supported more cops on the beat. Mm-hmm. We supported the burn grant so that our law enforcement would have the tools that they needed, whether it's other technology or whatever. Then, but again, they took the money, but we see that there are other issues that community-based leaders, faith and grassroots and others, are saying the relationship is worn. And my question is, if you get the money, should there be training, whether it's latent bias, deliberate bias, and also the use of force?
Yes, Senator, and
So
I certainly
do
agree
you
with...
think that, apart from whether they have a collaborative reform effort underway or not?
Yes, Senator, separate and apart from whether there's a collaborative reform effort, in a pure grant situation, we do seek to provide training. My only point was that, and I actually don't want to disagree with you on that because it is such an important point. My only point was we don't use that as a barrier to obtaining the grant, but rather as an incentive to work with us and obtain training from a variety of different sources. Some of that training will come as a result of the grants. Some of the training comes as a result of us connecting police departments with others.
I understand that, but the community feels they get a lot of money from the feds, and we don't have the necessary standards. So I'd like to have an ongoing conversation with you about it.
And those issues are under consideration because, as you indicate, they're very, very important and essential to the
What other
discussion.
tools do you feel that you have on criminal justice reform to help restore this trust that exists, that we need to restore in our communities?
Well, Senator, we have touched a little bit on the collaborative reform process, but again, as we have seen, without community trust in that, it may not be as effective as we would wish. Certainly, we then have other tools to consider. Within our programs, we do provide training on use of force. We do provide training on building community trust. We also, as you've mentioned earlier in your statement, through our Community Relations Service, work directly with the community to attempt to empower them to engage with their local leaders, with the police department, and to hold them accountable as well, because we do think that community accountability is an important part of that relationship.
Well, we have more to ask. If there's a second round, I want to focus then on juvenile justice.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Senator Kirk.
Prosecutions. I understand that countrywide we have about 1,517 under the RICO statutes. Assuming that Illinois is about 5% of the United States, that would mean we would have had over 60 RICO prosecutions in our area. Right now, it's about 0. I want to encourage you very strongly to work with Zach Farden, our U.S. attorney there, and to make sure that the RICO prosecutions that we have underway, that we can prosecute gangs of national significance that then Chairwoman Mikulski backed me on to take on the issue of crime gangs which are taking over some of our cities. I think RICO is the particular statute that we should go with.
Senator, I could not agree with you more on the efficacy of the RICO statute in targeting.
Let me just follow up on one other thing.
Certainly.
We have, this subcommittee has added $18.5 million to the U.S. Marshals to combat these gangs. My understanding is the new task force in Chicago has arrested about 344 people in relation to this effort. Is that your understanding?
Sir, I don't have that exact number. I'd have to get back to you, but I know that it is very active in the Chicago area.
Thank you.
Senator, just to follow up on your previous point, I could not agree with you more on the efficacy of the RICO statute as a tool to target violent crime, particularly gang violence. The importance of taking out the leadership of a gang, both from a law enforcement perspective and from a community perspective, cannot be overstated. I thank you for the discussions that you and I had during my courtesy visits with you. And in fact, I have had discussions with the U.S. Attorney in Chicago, as well as with the head of our criminal division here in Washington, about finding ways to bolster those efforts. And both have assured me that they are also committed to using this important tool.
Want to make sure we get the word down to Leslie Caldwell and Doug Crow, make sure they follow up.
Yes, sir. I've spoken with them, and they are committed to this as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Leahy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Madam Attorney General, it's nice to see you again. And
Thank you, sir.
thank you for being here. And I agree with what Senator Mikulski said about your presence in Baltimore. And that sort of thing is not only important for the community, which you'd understand far better than I, but it's important to the country. And I understand that, as you did in your hearing before the Judiciary Committee, you were asked a number of questions, immigration, executive action, something that, since I've been here, every president has done executive actions on immigration. I think probably the most extensive were by President Reagan. But I'd also point out, if an executive action is usually done when Congress doesn't act. Now, we spent hundreds of hours putting together an immigration bill in the U.S. Senate, passed a couple of years ago. Two-thirds of senators voted for it, Republicans and Democrats alike. Huge bipartisan effort. The Republican leadership in the House, even though it, by all analyses, it would have passed the House of Representatives, refused to take it up. So I have a little trouble with hearing criticisms of the president finally acting when the Congress would not. If the Congress doesn't like what the president has done in immigration, pass an immigration bill. We did it in the Senate. Again, Republicans and Democrats came together. They refused, the Republican leadership refused to bring it up in the House. Had they, we wouldn't even be having this question. So I just say that if we don't like it in the Congress, then let's pass a bill. Now, I also think we ought to reform our federal sentencing laws. The Bureau of Prisons is consuming nearly a third of the department's budget. And we talked about what we should be doing on law enforcement and other things. A third of your budget is going to the Bureau of Prisons. You got excessive mandatory minimum sentences are wasting money that could be spent otherwise. One of the proposals under consideration by the Senate Judiciary Committee, the Smarter Sentencing Act, would reduce mandatory minimums for nonviolent drug offenses. In your long career as a federal prosecutor, you prosecuted many drug cases. I prosecuted many drug cases at a quieter time. You think we can reduce those mandatory minimums and still keep our communities safe? Excuse me, still keep our communities safe?
Senator, I think we absolutely can have sentencing reform that enables us to reduce the mandatory minimums and keeps our communities safe. It's important to note that the recent efforts at sentencing reform that seek to reduce mandatory minimums do not eliminate them. They still recognize the need to provide serious punishment for the most serious offenders. In fact, what we have seen with the Smart on Crime initiative is that while overall drug cases may have gone down, the number of the longer sentences have actually gone up. So we are, in fact, trying now to focus on those larger offenders, the large-scale traffickers who are flooding our communities with poison, as opposed to the lower-level offenders who do need to be punished, but at a different scale. So I think sentencing reform is an excellent way to make sure that these efforts continue.
I think also we sometimes think we can do a one-size-fits-all. California did that with their 3 strikes are out, and darn near bankrupted the state. I worry about what's happening when we're taking money from law enforcement, lock up people. Some people should be in prison. I'm all for that. Others, we're wasting time and money, and that money could be used in other areas of the criminal justice system. I'm worried about the increase in heroin use and overdoses become a health crisis. Even in my state of Vermont, we've not been spared. Between 2000 and 2012, treatment for opioid addiction in Vermont rose by more than 770%. Just last week, the Vermont State Police issued a warning about the dangers of heroin laced with the drug fentanyl. They did that especially because it was linked to a number of multiple overdose deaths in our state. And addiction alone is never going to solve the issues, but the law enforcement agencies, particularly in small and rural states, or small and rural areas, which every state has, need some help. I pushed last year to create a new grant program to support anti-heroin task force. I understand the grant program is getting underway. Last year, the Justice Department was instructed to create a multi-agency task force to address the rising number of heroin uses. Can you tell me how that is going and what you might be able to do to help?
Yes,
It seems to be
Senator.
a public health crisis.
Yes, Senator, it certainly is the intersection of law enforcement and a public health issue. Certainly with respect, our budget does request additional funds to deal with this uptick in heroin abuse and other emerging drug areas. As you noted, there is a Senate-mandated heroin task force. They held their first meeting just last week, and the Deputy Attorney General is actively involved in that. And it deals not only with law enforcement, but the public health issues of that. It's also led and supplemented by several of our U.S. attorneys who over the past several years have themselves worked with public health officials and local communities to deal with this as a public health crisis. So we are bringing all voices to the table in an attempt to get the policies that have been effective at a local level promulgated nationwide and make them available to other communities as well. As I mentioned, the budget does call for increases that would support our law enforcement efforts in heroin as well as opioid addiction in general, because of course we still have the prescription drug crisis that is tied to this as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Mikulski.
Thank you. Senator Collins?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney General Lynch, just this morning, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals held that Section 215 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act does not authorize government to engage in the bulk collection of phone numbers under the metadata program. One of the president's independent review group, which looked at this law, Mike Morrell, the former deputy director of the CIA, as well as the former director of the FBI, Robert Mueller, have said that had this program been in place prior to the terrorist attacks on our country on 9/11/01, it likely would have prevented those attacks. So we have a very serious question here of balancing security with privacy rights and the clarity of the law, which is set to expire. That provision expires June 1st. Since January of last year, this section of FISA has been conducted pursuant to new procedures that were instituted by the president. Now, the AG provides a semi-annual report on privacy violations associated with the law. The new procedure provides that, except in emergencies, the FISA court is now required to approve ahead of time any queries of phone records database because of the changes made by the president. Two questions. One, are you aware of any significant privacy violations that have occurred since the president instituted these reforms? And second, has the Justice Department made a decision yet on appealing this decision by the Second Circuit? I realize it just came down.
Yes. Thank you, Senator. Obviously, Section 215 has been a vital tool in our national security arsenal, but the department has, as you note, been operating under the new directives by the president with a view towards modifying the program to keep its efficacy but preserve privacy interests. I am not aware at this time of any violations that have come to light. I will certainly seek a briefing on that, and should I learn of any, I will advise the committee of that if my knowledge changes on that. But as of now, I have not been informed of any violations under the new policy. With respect to the decision from the Second Circuit, my home circuit, actually, this morning, we are reviewing that decision. But given the time issues involving the expiration of it, we are also, and have been, working with this body and others to look for ways to reauthorize Section 215 in a way that does preserve its efficacy and protect privacy.
Thank you. I want to turn to an issue that you and I discussed when we met at my office, and that is the tremendous increase in the number of scams that are targeting our nation's seniors. They range from the Jamaican lottery scam, the grandparent scam, and most recently, the IRS imposter scam. What we've learned is that these scammers typically operate offshore, and they rely upon advanced communication and payment technologies. And the losses suffered by individual victims are devastating, and they aggregate in the billions. Yet, the federal government has been extraordinarily lax in its approach to actually going after these criminals. And only the federal government can realistically tackle the international crime networks behind many of these scams. I also want to bring to your attention that under your predecessor, and I want to make it very clear it was before your time, that the department refused to send to the committee a witness to testify on the department's efforts. That was appalling to both the ranking member, Senator Claire McCaskill, and to me. What can the department do to be more aggressive in prosecuting these scams, which aggregate in the billions of dollars? And will you pledge that from now on the department will cooperate with our investigations?
Well, Senator, with respect to the very, very important role that this subcommittee plays in gathering information about the department's priorities, I will always strive to cooperate and provide either a witness or information, whatever is best for the committee to receive, so that we can help you learn not only about our priorities and issues, but also to do the important work of this subcommittee. So I'm not aware of the circumstances that were around that previous request, but certainly I will always commit to providing this committee with the assistance that it needs, either before the committee or at the staff level. With respect to the very important matter that you raise about these, many of them are overseas-based fraud schemes, the other troubling factor to me is that many of them target our elderly population. And that is a particularly vulnerable population to telemarketing schemes, be they based locally or be they based overseas. So that's very troubling to me, and the protection of our vulnerable population is one of our priorities. I'm not aware right now of the cases that we may have in our pipeline. I certainly will ask for a review of this important issue. Our budget does, of course, ask for funding to continue the fight against fraud. And certainly I know that all of the agencies that are involved in this, you mentioned, for example, the IRS scam calls, that agency is also very, very concerned about that. And as someone who actually received one of those calls myself, I can tell you that if one is not aware of essentially the fraudulent nature of them, they can be very disturbing. And it's easy to see how our seniors in particular, but other people can get pulled into that.
Thank you.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Vice Chairwoman Mikulski, for holding this hearing, and welcome, Madam Attorney General. It's so great to see you again, this time in your now official capacity leading the Department of Justice. I was pleased to hear a few minutes ago your giving voice to the seriousness with which you take issues of overprescription, addiction, and abuse, and diversion of opioid drugs. And I want to call your attention to a situation in my state of Wisconsin at the Toma VA medical facility, where there are a number of investigations ongoing, all relating to these very pressing issues. I called on your predecessor, Attorney General Holder, to investigate potential criminal activity at this facility. My request was, and my communication to your predecessor was based on multiple sources, but including published investigative journalism reports, numerous whistleblowers and citizens who have contacted my office, conveying information that, in my mind, raises serious questions about potential criminal activity. Currently, the VA is conducting an investigation, as is the VA Inspector General, and the DEA is engaged in an investigation of allegations of drug diversion at the facility. But I remain convinced that there are additional elements that warrant further criminal investigation. And my letter to your predecessor outlined some of those, but including just a alarming number of 911 calls made from the facility over the past several years, over 2,000, reports of 24 unexplained deaths, allegations of illegal access to confidential patient information and law enforcement records, et cetera. Now, I understand you can't get into any details of ongoing criminal investigations. So as a consequence, I would simply ask you, will you evaluate these allegations and coordinate with the existing 3 federal investigations to determine if there are additional criminal investigations that are warranted and appropriate in this particular case?
Well, Senator, I thank you for raising this important issue, because I think that the safety and security of those who use our Veterans Administration's hospitals is foremost a priority, not just for my tenure as Attorney General, but for our country. And as someone whose family has used those hospitals, I'm well aware of how vital and a resource they are to the families and to those who are ill. And certainly I'm aware of the situation. I have not yet had a briefing on the matter, but I will commit to you that I will request a briefing on this matter and make sure that all efforts to coordinate are being undertaken.
I thank you for that. And one additional matter, again, given the urgency with which we respond to the opioid abuse problems that we have throughout our nation, I want to make you aware of some impediments in the DEA investigation into drug diversion at the Toma VA. The DEA and the VA have differing interpretations of the scope of a VA-specific patient privacy law, which may be limiting the ability of VA personnel to fully participate in interviews if they are told that they cannot reveal particular information about patients. It certainly would be an incredible obstacle to a thorough investigation if not fully resolved. And so if you have previously been briefed, I would ask you, what is the status of the department's effort to resolve the confusion? And if you need authorization language from the Congress to resolve this issue, I would appreciate it if you would provide that to me and my staff.
Thank you, Senator. As I indicated, I have not yet been briefed on this matter, although I am aware of the DEA's investigation into the situation and, of course, fully support it. And we will also look into whether or not there are impediments to DEA being able to view this as a criminal matter. Thank you.
Senator Alexander.
Madam Attorney General, welcome. I was in New York City for my law school reunion at NYU this past weekend, and many of my classmates knew you and very complimentary of
Thank you, sir.
I want to begin by thanking you for something, or the department for something. It's my understanding that sometime today, the Drug Enforcement Administration will approve the state of Tennessee's application to import certified industrial hemp seeds for research purposes. That may seem like a small matter, but it was important to our state agricultural department, and there was a practical issue. The seeds had to be planted in May, so I thank you for moving that along. Second, on the Drug Enforcement Agency, I'd like to call something to your attention that's been called to my attention. I don't have a solution for it, but I think it deserves really the attention of the Attorney General and the management, and it's the issue of has to do with prescription drug abuse and the relationship between the Drug Enforcement Administration and the wholesalers or pharmacies who distribute controlled substances. Now, here's what seems to be the problem. DEA requires wholesalers to track and report on, quote, suspicious orders. These would be orders from local drugstores, I guess. And it restricts how those orders can be filled if they're flagged as suspicious. Well, there's no guidance or clarity about what is a, quote, suspicious order, and as we both know in the law, whenever the law gets too vague, sometimes there are risks and problems associated with that. One risk, of course, is someone goes in, if a wholesaler refuses to send a controlled substance to a drugstore, then someone with a broken arm goes to the drugstore and that person's out of luck. The other risk is that there develops an adversarial relationship between the Drug Enforcement Agency and the wholesaler over this issue. So my request is simply this: would you please take a look at the words suspicious orders and the relationship between the DEA and wholesalers and pharmacies, and see if there needs to be additional guidance so that we do not have an adversarial relationship between people who really should be in a partnership to make sure controlled substances aren't sent to the wrong people at the corner drugstore.
Certainly, Senator, I can commit to that. I also echo your concern that in a desire to protect people, we may be, in fact, inhibiting the ability of people who have legitimate needs for pain medications to obtain them, which is not our intention. And it certainly is something that I will undertake to review.
Thank you very much. And my final question also is just to put a spotlight on something. Our state, Tennessee, is third in the nation in meth lab seizures. It's a big problem, especially in rural areas. And because the demand for enforcement exceeds the funding, our state developed what they call a central storage container program. They found a way to clean up meth labs for $500 per lab instead of $2,500 per lab. Now that's progress if you can do something for 20% of what you used to do it for. So we were pleased to see the budget request of $4 million more for the meth lab cleanup program this year, but disappointed that the department decided not to include funding for the competitive grant program for state anti-meth task forces. Given that the meth epidemic is one of the most urgent drug problems that we face, especially in rural areas, what was the thinking, especially as it affects rural communities with less resources, in not expanding or continuing the competitive grant program for states?
Thank you, Senator. My understanding of that competitive program, it's the COPS anti-methamphetamine program, is that, in fact, the funding that exists is 2-year funding, And so there was not a need to request funding for this year because the program as enacted last year would cover this fiscal year. It is, believe me, not a desire to end or in any way diminish the program. And it's also my understanding that the solicitation for that for this fiscal year will be released very soon, later this month in May. So I regret the appearance that the department may have pulled back or withdrawn from that, but it's my understanding that because we have two-year funding for that, that we will then have to come back in the next fiscal year to request additional
Well,
funding.
that would be
as
very
a result.
encouraging. Thank you for that explanation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Murphy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Attorney General Lynch. Congratulations on your confirmation. I had a few broader questions to ask, but I wanted to begin with a rather specific question to the Northeast region and to Connecticut. We have historically had a women's correctional facility in Danbury, Connecticut, and in July of 2013, the Federal Bureau of Prisons announced it was going to close that facility, which would essentially be the only was the only facility for women in the Northeast. We had a number of really positive discussions with the Department of Justice and with the Bureau of Prisons, and they reversed that decision, understanding that it would be incredibly detrimental to women who are incarcerated in the Northeast if they had to be transported hundreds, if not thousands of miles to other facilities. The solution was to build a new facility, a low-security facility for women in Danbury, and the initial schedule was for that facility to be completed by this month, actually. And in the interim, all of these women are being spread out amongst jails in the Northeast, jails that really are not equipped to be able to handle the things that these women need, especially drug counseling, in the long run. So I just wanted to ask you if you had an update on progress of the construction of that new facility, and whether we can expect that construction will be completed as soon as practically possible so that we can transition these women who are now in places like Brooklyn, Philadelphia, back to a more long-term suitable facility.
Certainly, Senator, and I share your concern over that important issue. When I began my career as a young AUSA in the early 1990s, FCI Danbury was not yet a total women's facility, and most women who were prosecuted in the federal system ultimately ended up being housed in West Virginia. And the facility was fine, but for women from the Northeast, it presented a significant negative impact on their ability to stay connected with their families. It harmed their relationships with their children. Those collateral consequences are the types of things that we seek to avoid. And so having FCI Danbury in the Northeast has certainly been a positive step, a positive law enforcement step for all of us who work in that area. My understanding is that the environmental impact studies were completed quite recently and that there are additional matters. In fact, I believe that there's pricing materials being resolved this month, and I'm told by my team that construction should begin this summer. I do not have an anticipated completion date for you, and I regret to say that I'm hesitant to offer one, having seen several government construction projects in my day. But I am told that construction should begin this summer on the new facility, and I share your concern and view that it's an important law enforcement resource for the Northeast.
Thank you for your personal attention to this. I look forward to talking with you about it as we move towards the construction schedule. Again, this is really a development of a really positive series of conversations. Not easy to reverse course on something like this, and I really thank the Bureau of Prisons for considering the impact of shuttling women prisoners to far reaches of the Northeast. Just one other query. I represent Newtown, Connecticut, Sandy Hook. It's a community that is still grieving, dealing with the ripples of trauma that still exist there. I understand the realities of this place, that we are not likely to get a bill expanding background checks, though 90% of Americans support the notion that everyone should have to prove that they're not a criminal before they buy a gun. But as Senator Shelby noted in his opening comments, the ATF position is open, a very important position for the enforcement of existing laws, and the existing national background check system can be made much better to make sure that all of the data is being uploaded into it, making sure that that information is distributed. 100,000 individuals every year are prohibited from buying guns because of the background check system. It works. And so I just would ask for your commitment to work with us to make sure that the ATF has the resources that they need in order to carry out existing laws, and your commitment, as your predecessor did, to work with us on making sure that our national background check system has the resources it needs to continue to do the good work that it has for decades.
Certainly, Senator, I am committed to that important goal of supporting and strengthening the ATF, as well as making sure that their processes and the existing systems are as efficient as possible, because that's how we protect our citizens.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Attorney General, welcome, and thank you. I want to point out the aspects of your budget that focus on tribal law enforcement. This is an issue, of course, that is very important in my state. We've had an opportunity to discuss it in your pre-confirmation meeting that we had, and I know that you have recently had conversation with Julie Kitka, who is the president of the Alaska Federation of Natives. The public safety challenges that face Alaska Native villages run the gamut, everything from the absence of full-time law enforcement officers in some villages, inadequate resources devoted towards community-based prevention and restorative justice efforts. We have a tribal court system that is struggling because it is just really in an embryonic stage. We have human trafficking of our Native women. The heroin issues that you have heard discussed here today are not just limited to the cities, they are out in our villages. I know that you have got a lot on your plate. It's clear from the discussions here this morning, but I would like your commitment that you will work with me, you will work with the Alaska Federation of Natives to really be involved to a personal extent and degree with some of these challenges that we are facing as it relates to rural justice in our Native areas, or in our rural areas. I have been asked by AFN, and I'm actually going to be speaking to them by video or by teleconference this afternoon to their board for an opportunity to sit with you and some of the Native leadership to discuss some of these issues that are just so very troubling to us right now. So I'd like your commitment that we can have that meeting, and perhaps very quickly your observations based on your conversations with not only me but Ms. Kitka about some of the substantive issues that we have with rural justice in Alaska.
Senator, I would look forward to such a meeting, and I would welcome it. I think that the commitment that the Department of Justice and our nation have made to Indian country over the last several years has shown great promise, but it is one that must be sustained, maintained, and improved upon. We have several requests in the budget that go directly to the issues of tribal justice, the Office of Violence Against Women, for example, and because it is such an important issue to me, I'm just going to outline them briefly, because we are asking for an increase of $100 million, but part of that money would go for tribal grant set-asides. $20 million would go for the Crime Victims Fund Tribal Assistance Program. $5 million would go for the Office of Violence Against Women Domestic Violence Jurisdiction Program. As I know you are well aware, we recently had great success in enabling tribal courts to deal with offenders who commit violence against women and children on Native lands when the offenders are non-natives. That had been a bar for some time it has been tremendously helpful to have given that jurisdiction to the tribal courts. We also are asking for money to address environmental problems in Indian country, as well as to maintain current positions. I firmly believe that this commitment must be not only maintained but expanded upon. Else we really do risk sliding backwards, Senator, with all the issues faced by tribal lands, particularly, as you know, as you and I discussed with Alaska, having such a large land mass and dealing with the law enforcement challenges there. We have to set in place systems that will work, but that will also be maintained.
Well, I agree with you. We've got a lot of work to do, and I look forward to those conversations with you and your team. On the heroin issue, you've heard it repeated several times here today, but I will reiterate that in our very remote rural areas, areas that are islands, areas that are not accessible by road, we are seeing the impact of heroin, whether it is in Dillingham, whether it is in Kodiak, and actually we've got meth issues in the community of Kodiak, and law enforcement is focusing on that, so they're not able to focus on some of the smaller villages that are out there. So you mentioned the heroin task force that is in place. I would ask that you not forget the smaller communities where we see an addiction and a devastation, truly just taking our communities, just wiping them out. And it's a frightening thought that the resources may be there and available for the cities, but that our smaller communities, where losing a few young people can be so significant to just the health, the morale, the safety. So I'd ask that you work with us on that. And Mr. Chairman, I do have other questions that I would like submitted for the record, most specifically with the codification of the Brady obligation in statute. We've talked about that, but I'd like further follow-up on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator.
Coons?
Thank you, Chairman Shelby, and thank you, Attorney General Lynch, for your service and for your testimony before us today, and just want to congratulate you as you begin important service in the interest of our nation. Last year, Congress demonstrated its commitment to the Victims of Child Abuse Act by unanimously reauthorizing the programs under VOCA in both chambers. Children's advocacy centers funded under this law conduct forensic interviews in a way that's both effective in serving law enforcement needs and respectful of the delicate needs of child victims of abuse. I was, frankly, very disappointed to see the President's FY16 budget request once again only asked for half of the amount needed to fund these crucial programs. We're talking a modest amount, $11 million out of the $20 million authorization. What has been your experience with children's advocacy centers in your law enforcement role, and do you expect to be an advocate for them within the department in 2016 and beyond?
Well, Senator, my experience has been based primarily with my experience as a U.S. Attorney in the Eastern District of New York, and we have found the Children's Advocacy Centers to be extremely powerful partners, and for us, it has been in dealing with children who may be related to the victims of human trafficking. That has been a huge problem that we have seen in the New York area. And so I know that there are other issues that are in other parts of the country, and I look forward to learning more about those. It is definitely a program that I feel is extremely important. The overall budget request is part of our overall request for juvenile justice programs, and it is our hope that the panoply of programs that we offer will, in fact, help provide a valuable safety net for those children in need.
Well, thank you. I look forward to working with you on these valuable programs that I think are under-resourced, but there's many challenges in our budget environment. Let me next reference the Violence Reduction Network, which is an effective program for cities like my hometown of Wilmington to address violent crime and to connect local law enforcement with cutting-edge law enforcement resources, mostly federal resources. And I just want to thank the very hardworking team of OJP's Bureau of Justice Assistance and the Wilmington team that's led by John Skinner. I hope you could commit to ensuring the VRN program is maintained and supported with necessary resources so that it can continue to serve as a valuable connection between DOJ and a number of communities that have seen dramatic increases in violent crime. Is that something you're inclined to support?
Senator, I support it wholeheartedly. Certainly, Wilmington has been one of the flagship cities in this, not a distinction that you sought, but one which came upon you, I understand. But Wilmington has been an excellent model, frankly, for the level of cooperation between the Wilmington Police Department and the FBI, and also the state and local and federal law enforcement as well. My understanding is that we actually have identified 5 additional cities for the next fiscal year to be involved in this program. Again, not a distinction that they would seek, but one which we think is an area in which we think we can provide assistance. Beyond just the VRN, of course, we do have other resources for violent crime for our cities that may not be in such extremis, and we're fully committed to those programs as well.
Well, thank you. I look forward to continuing to work on federal, state, local law enforcement partnerships that can reduce violent crime. Let's turn to the Collaborative Reform Initiative. As we all know, we've seen strained relationships between law enforcement and communities in cities across the nation. Most recently, and tragically, Baltimore, but this has occurred in many other places. I'm particularly interested in the CRI, the Collaborative Reform Initiative efforts that are underway in Baltimore, and would be interested in hearing more about what's on the table for the project and how it's going to be sustained, and whether recent events in Baltimore have affected the CRI timeline or not.
Well, with respect to the situation in Baltimore, the collaborative reform effect was begun in last fall, actually at the request of the Baltimore Police Department, and our COPS service office went into Baltimore and has been very, very active in working with both the police and the community to work on ways to improve the Baltimore Police Department. As we have discussed in this chamber earlier today, and throughout my most recent visit to Baltimore, recent events have certainly made us cognizant of concerns that both the city, the police, and the community have about the efficacy of a collaborative reform process. And we are listening to all those voices, and we are certainly considering the best way as we move forward to help the Baltimore Police Department. It's important to note, I think, that collaborative reform has been a very successful tool throughout the country. We not only provide technical assistance and training to police departments around the country, but we connect them with other police departments who have themselves either been through the process or who themselves have very positive law enforcement practices. So we try and make it a peer-to-peer relationship in terms of work and training as well. It is a tool, very, very important tool, and as you will note, our budget does request an increase in that of about $20 million to support these important reforms.
Thank you, Madam Attorney General. I'll submit a question for the record about forensic hair analysis. I was very concerned to see reports that FBI forensic experts may have overstated the strength of evidence, and I would look forward to hearing what DOJ will be doing to provide meaningful relief to those convicted on the strength of misstated or inaccurate testimony.
Thank you, sir. That is, in fact, an ongoing process, and we're very committed to working on that issue.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Bozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for running back and forth to you and our Attorney General. There's two things that are really important to Arkansas. This in the sense of combating violent crime and the other things that we're dealing with, but also reauthorizing the child nutrition programs. And so there's, we have a subcommittee going on in that regard too, which both of those things go together. You know, if you have hungry kids, then again, it all flows together. In the Smart Crime Initiative, I know that you've talked a lot about that and how important it is, and that in your request you state that the initiative will spend $247 billion to focus resources on reducing disparate impacts of the criminal justice system on vulnerable communities. Certainly, that's important to Arkansas. But my understanding is that that I'm hearing from attorney generals throughout the country that the reality is that there seems to be a directive coming down that terrorism and cybercrime, you know, is kind of the number one. Terrorism and cybercrime are the number one things that, you know, that they're to devote their resources to. Can you talk a little bit about that? And I know that's so important, and yet, you know, we have so many communities now that are experiencing violent crime that is increasing.
Senator, thank you for the opportunity to address that issue. Obviously, national security and cybercrime are important areas. As I've noted, they represent not only ongoing threats to public safety and to American citizens, but new and emerging threats. And so our budget does ask for funding for that. With respect to violent crime, however, I will reiterate that the department's commitment and my own commitment to that issue has not wavered. One of the things I think that is very important as a former U.S. attorney myself has been to recognize that every prosecutor knows best the crime problems of their area. And so what we try and do in the department, certainly as I look at policies and interact with not just people here in Washington, but also in the field, is make sure that we maintain the flexibility that allows U.S. attorneys working in conjunction with their state and local counterparts to identify the crime problems in their area and focus their resources on them. For example, my former office, the Eastern District of New York, has both a strong national security practice and a large violent crime program. Every office is not going to be similarly situated. So it is my goal to give my prosecutors the flexibility that they need to deploy their resources to best address the crime problems at hand. With respect to violent crime, the department's anti-violence strategies for several years have been focused on three main issues. Law enforcement, effective, vigorous, strong is the core of that and the first part of that. But we are also attempting to look at prevention as well as reentry programs. And it's been very gratifying to see members of this body also address those issues at the statutory level as well. As you mentioned with respect to the food services program, not a DOJ program, but one that certainly impacts into the crime rate of an area because it impacts the poverty rate of an area and the health of the children and the opportunities that they have. So it is interdisciplinary, it is holistic, and I can assure you that there's not an overemphasis on one type of priority over others. If a U.S. attorney feels that the largest problem in their area is one of violent crime, we have a number of ways in which we deal with that. We will concentrate resources for them. We will provide assistance from other offices and main justice for them. I myself have in the past detailed attorneys from my office to others to help out on cases, capital cases and the like. And so you'll find a very, very strong commitment to violent crime prevention and enforcement within the department.
Thank you. Another huge issue going on throughout the country, not only in Arkansas, is opiates and heroin. And, there's reports of doubling, tripling, things in that nature. Can you talk a little bit about addressing that problem? And then the other thing that I think is so important are the drug courts. And I think for the first time, you've actually got something in your budget for that.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about, are you, an advocate or lukewarm or whatever? I really feel like that's, if there is a solution, that is one of the key components to it.
One of the key components, certainly in the reduction of over-incarceration as well as crime prevention, have been drug courts. At the federal level, not only are we focused on drug courts, we're also focused on expanding our network of veterans drug courts, because what we've seen also are that our veterans are returning with a number of problems for which the criminal justice system may not be the best method to treat them. For lack of a better phrase. And so we are trying to expand opportunities to provide treatment as well as crime prevention for our veterans as well as other low-level drug offenders. They've been tremendously successful. In my former district, the Eastern District of New York, has a very strong pretrial diversion program as well as a pretrial opportunity program. We try and pair those with reentry programs also. So I think that that is a very, very important tool. I would add, however, that it really has been the states who have been showing us by example how effective drug courts can be in reducing crime, reducing recidivism, and the real goal is to make productive members of society out of those individuals whom we otherwise might have incarcerated for way too long.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I know the hour is late. I just have a few comments for ongoing efforts. First of all, I'm going to associate myself with the remarks of Senator Leahy, the gentleman from Vermont, about the need for reviewing sentencing reform. But the prison population, you know, your appropriations request for prisons is $7 billion. It's a significant amount of money because it constitutes almost 1/3 of your appropriations. I would hope, because there is bipartisan effort in this area, in terms of looking at what we need to do to safely reduce the prison population. We have an excellent facility in Maryland and Cumberland, but our concerns would be the public, safety for the public. Second, and not in parallel, safety for the correction officers, because you've got significant challenges in the prison with overcrowding, and I worry about their safety. And then third, what are the issues where prisoners who are either really old or really sick, in other words, how can we begin to do an evaluation of who's in prison and should they be in prison? And Madam Attorney General, I would hope as you begin your term here that you look also at those of a significant age or significantly ill where they would pose no threat to the general public. So let's have an ongoing conversation about it and look forward to your recommendations. Heroin, it has come up just about from all of us on both sides of the aisle. My governor, a Republican governor, a 90% Democratic congressional delegation, we're Team Maryland and wanting to deal with this. So we ask that your task force, which I initiated when I was chair in support of Senator Shelby, is that it not only be an internal to the Justice Department, but it be across the board involving the Department of Education, the Department of Human Services, the Department of Homeland Security. Is that the nature of the task force, or is it internal to the Justice Department?
Senator, the task force had its first meeting last week, and I haven't been fully briefed on that, but I will confirm the level of participation to you. Even if it is, however, focused on the Department of Justice, that does not preclude us from, as you noted, reaching across the street to those agencies and pulling them into the debate.
We think this is a big issue. It is a big issue in our state. The third point that I'm going to make is juvenile justice. There are several grant programs here in the area of juvenile justice. I would hope in the days ahead we could work with your department on what you feel would have, as we work with our mayor and our community-based groups, what would be the effective juvenile justice programs that we could either bring additional resources in or appeal for or apply for these grants. I know, speaking for the delegation and speaking for the leadership of our city, not only government, but our private sector, as well as our community-based, faith-based leaders, we see this as a situation in which there could be an opportunity to really do something very dramatic, very significant in terms of our young people, so that for those that are on track, we help them stay there. For those who need to get back on track, help them get there. And for those who really constitute significant risk to our community, we also do the right intervention. So we look forward to ongoing conversation. You're always welcome back in our hometown, but we also appreciate the availability and the accessibility and the professionalism of your staff.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Senator Collins?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to associate myself with the remarks of the senator from Arkansas about the value of drug courts and the special veterans courts. I've seen firsthand in Maine the difference that these courts can make in helping people straighten out their lives, avoid imprisonment, and really change the direction of their lives. I know that doesn't happen in every case, but I've got to believe that these are cost-effective, and that's why I'm disappointed that the administration's budget cuts $5 million from the drug courts program compared to last year when it was funded at about $41 million, and also cuts $1 million from the veteran treatment courts. I hope our subcommittee will take a look at that, but I wonder if the department has done any sort of cost-benefit analysis, because this is a case where I think we're being penny-wise and pound-foolish.
Ma'am, I'm not aware of any cost-benefit analysis to that, but I will determine if I will see. I will ask if that was done. And so I don't know the basis for that particular allocation of funding there, but I certainly share your commitment to the efficacy of drug courts and the veterans treatment courts. And like you, I have seen them literally change lives.
Well, I've seen it firsthand because I actually several years ago hired someone who had gone through the drug court program successfully. I will admit that I was somewhat apprehensive, but she turned out to be a wonderful employee, and I wanted to give her a chance. But for drug court, her life would have gone in a very different direction. I've also spoken at a graduation ceremony for a drug court in Portland, and it was really inspiring to see largely younger people being reunited with their significant others or spouses and children, and know that they really were committed to turning their lives around. I've also heard of the cases that weren't successful, but that's the beauty of the drug court, and I just think this is something that deserves our support.
I agree. Thank you, ma'am.
Let me just end with one other very successful program in my state that also, unfortunately, is cut quite severely in the administration's budget. And I realize you've not been on the job very long, and we're not involved in formulating this budget, so I'm not certain whether you're familiar with this program. But it's called the Regional Information Sharing System. And I hear repeatedly from police officers, detectives, sheriffs, law enforcement at all levels in Maine, state, local, county, about how essential the RIS program is in their efforts to fight violent crime, drug activity, human trafficking, and a host of other criminal enterprises. I want to give you a specific example. A detective in Franklin County, a rural part of our state, told me recently about a fascinating case involving counterfeit silver dollars from China. He used the RIS databases to discover that the suspect was committing this crime throughout the state of Maine. He was also able to determine whether the same crime was occurring in other states. What was at first just a one-incident case became a statewide investigation with the help of the RIS network and tools, which are especially vital in a rural state like Maine. And that is why I'm disappointed that the president's budget has slashed funding for this program. It is such an important tool for rural law enforcement to use. So I hope, looking forward, that you will take a look at programs that encourage that kind of collaboration at all levels of government and allow a local sheriff who has arrested someone to find out that this person's been committing crimes not only throughout his or her state, but in other states as well, and thus build a stronger case.
Yes, ma'am. I share your view that that system is particularly efficacious. My understanding of that is that the request in the budget this year mirrors the request last year, which was increased by $5 million, so that it was not viewed as cutting that program, but maintaining it, because we do feel that it is so important.
Well, it's my understanding that we plussed up the program in the Appropriations Committee because it was so successful, has bipartisan support, but then the administration in its budget request went back to the previous level. I may be mistaken about that, and I would certainly welcome any additional information.
We'll provide you additional information on that issue.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Collins. Attorney General Lynch, thank you for appearing here today and being patient with all of us' questions. We look forward to working with you to make sure that the Justice Department is properly funded. If there are no further questions here this afternoon, senators may submit additional questions for the subcommittee's official hearing record. And we request that the Department of Justice responses to those questions would come back within 30 days, Madam Attorney General. Now the subcommittee stands in recess, subject to the call of the chair. The committee is adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.